One of the hottest cameras on the market right now is this guy, the Ursa Mini Pro, and it brings some very important professional upgrades to the original Ursa Mini. But what makes this camera so exciting is the price to power ratio. $8,000 gives you the strongest codec for the price. But that advantage is quickly offset when you realize you need $3,500 worth of accessories in order to make it a professional working camera. And that brings it up to the same price point as the FS7 Mark II and pretty close to the price of a C300 Mark II. So here we are. You're going to spend $12,000 to $15,000 on a new camera system. So I want to give you 6 different ways that set these cameras apart. Which camera works better for what, and what you're actually getting for the price. But what I'm not going to do is an image quality shootout because it's stupid for a couple reasons. Number one is camera tests are often subjective based on lighting and subject matter. And the second is that by the time the footage gets uploaded and compressed online, a lot of those differences are lost. So if you're really interested in to see the footage that comes out of these cameras, there's plenty of examples online for you to do your own research. But for now, we got bigger fish to fry. So without further ado, let's begin. So first up is ergonomics and use. Out of the box, it would seem like the FS7 Mark II is the real winner, and that's because everything that you see here except for the lens is what you get with the camera. So you get a top handle, you get a sidearm and handle controller, as well as a viewfinder screen combo, but the downside is that you don't really get a real EVF. You get a screen that has a sort of an eyepiece loop on top of it. And so you're not really getting the clarity of a real EVF, but you're also dealing with this kind of plasticky eyepiece, which is really fumbly. And when you want to take it off and put it on, like you can see how much I'm struggling right now. It's got these little clips. And if you're in the field and you're trying to move quick and you're trying to put this guy back on, it's just a bit of a nuisance. It's also kind of flimsy and it wants to kind of fall off sometimes. So I'm not a big fan of it, but for the price, we all put up with it because you get an incredible deal for what you pay for. Moving on to the C300, you kind of have to hold it like a DSLR. So you do get everything that you see here again without the lens, but it's meant to sort of hold like this and with the eyepiece of the EVF in the back. If you want to use it like a real production camera handheld, you do need to get a separate sort of shape or shoulder rig for it. And that makes it a lot better to use handheld, but the downside is you lose the EVF, which is on the back, and the balance point, because the camera is so condensed, puts the camera back, and then this eyepiece is shoved right into your face, and it's really hard to look at, I find. So not ideal, especially for the price point, to have this just at least handheld on your shoulder. When it comes down to the Ursa Mini Pro, when you buy the camera, it's just a box, like when you buy a Red camera. But once you factor in all the price for everything, you do get an amazing EVF. This EVF is incredible. It looks really, really great. It's got a lot of hot buttons on it to be able to use different functionality with it. It feels really ergonomic. The shoulder rig and the handle that you get with it feel great. It balances well. Camera feels a little bit heavy, and it's a bit exhausting to wear longer than, say, like the FS7 is. But the FS7 doesn't really have that great of a shoulder mount on it, so a lot of people will buy, again, another $1,000 shape rig or shoulder rig for it to have a more comfortable shoulder handheld experience. It's kind of hard to say who wins in this particular case. I've really enjoyed using the FS7 despite its failings, but it's no denying how nice it is to use this EVF here. And when you do factor in the price of all of this sort of stuff, it is still cheaper than the FS7 and their sort of flimsy piece here. So you certainly don't want to buy a camera based solely on these ergonomics alone. But overall use, I find the FS7 is nice and light and it's really comfortable to use. So inconclusive. So let's quickly talk about viewfinders and buttons. The viewfinder on the FS7 Mark II is kind of small, and I find it sometimes a little bit hard to read, especially when you don't have the eyepiece on. But what I do like is that it is fully manipulatable, and I can turn it in sort of any direction that I want. Moving over to the C300, I love the C300 screen. It is my favorite screen out of all of them. It's fully manipulatable, but the downside is all the buttons for audio and playback control are on top, and that's fine if you're using it like a DSLR. But if you mount this on the shoulder or if it's on sticks high up, it's a really laborious process to get access and to see what's going on up there. And so they kind of lost me on that, and I wish they didn't put the controls up there. But the screen is great. I really love the size of the screen. And then moving over to the screen for the Ursa Mini Pro, it's really awesome. It's really robust. I like the look of it. It's fully touch screenable, so it's almost like using an Apple computer. Very simple layout. The downside is that they didn't make the screen 360-degree rotatable, which means that there's no way to turn it in and then place it back inside the camera, but there's also no way to flip it towards the front, which means that if you are a sort of a shooter director or somebody who does interviews and you're setting up all the lights by yourself, it's nice to be able to turn a screen towards you, sit in the subject's seat, and be able to check lighting before the subject arrives. You can't do that with this, which I find is a bit of a nuisance. Of course, this is all solvable with a separate monitor, but we're trying to avoid buying additional accessories. So that's the screens. Moving on to sort of using them and the buttons. Well, I'm going to be honest. If you buy any one of these cameras and you're shooting with it every week or every day, you get used to the way it's designed really, really quickly. And no matter what the manufacturer did, you adapt to. And so it's not really that big of an issue. But I will say I've gotten really used to shooting with the FS7, and it's great despite the fact that it is pretty loaded with buttons. But interestingly enough, when I transfer over to using the Canon C300 Mark II, I do fall in love with the design of their buttons. The buttons are backlit, which means I can see them in low light, and there's just not a ton of them. So I have a limited selection, but I have the most important buttons at my fingertips. So I find it's actually faster for me to use the C300 Mark II than it is with the FS7, which just has a plethora of buttons and switches and dials that can confuse things. Moving over to the Ursa Mini Pro, very similar to the FS7 in that there's a lot more to choose from, but it's kind of like in between. It's not as minimal as the C300 Mark II, but it's not as complicated as the FS7. One of the main complaints, though, is that audio dials, for example, are just unlimited turning. There's no hard stops, so you never really know when you're at that. You can't really feel it out between like 0 and 10, which I find super useful. As well, same with the switches. They're all sort of just electronic, which means that there is no like 1, 2, 3. It's just sort of up, 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 down, down, down. And so it really relies on you being able to look through the screen or the viewfinder to get a sense of where you are. And that's not ideal in very fast run and gun situations. The ND filters on the Ursa Mini Pro and the FS7 are fully mechanical, which is a lot more reliable in my opinion than the electronic ND that's found in the C300 Mark II. So that could potentially fail on you and then you don't have access to your NDs, where that's not the case necessarily when it's just a mechanical operation. So number 2 is codec. Now, if we're talking about RAW, then the Blackmagic wins, of course, hands down. That's kind of the whole point of this camera. It records RAW internally to SD or CFast cards. And coming this summer, there's going to be another adaptable unit that you can use SSD media for, and that's going to save you a ton of money. But it really still comes at a cost because shooting RAW with this camera is 30 gigabytes a minute of footage. 30 gigabytes. So you better get used to buying a lot of media, no matter what media you're using. So very few of us are actually going to be shooting RAW on a regular basis. What we're probably going to be using is some of the other codecs. So this guy is ProRes, XAVC with the FS7, and the MXF with the Canon C300. And when we're looking at comparing all of them, they're all around the same at about 4 gigabytes a minute. So it's kind of a tie because it really depends on what you're using the camera for. If you're shooting RAW and you're buying the camera to shoot RAW, then yes, the Blackmagic is definitely the stronger of all the cameras here. All right, so number 3 is sensor. Now I know I said we weren't going to do an image quality test, and it's not really about the image quality. We're talking about its light sensitivity. And when we look at the base ISO of these 3 cameras, we see that this is really 400. Some people are saying 800. It's not clear, but I'm going to say 400. I might be wrong. It's 800 for the Canon C300 Mark II. It's great that it's not 850 anymore. And then moving over to the Sony is 2000. And when you're in EI mode, you're locked at 2000. You can't even change it. The clear winner for me in this particular case is the FS7 Mark II at the 2000. It's great in low light. If you're in custom mode, you can change that ISO a bit more. Moving over to the Canon C300 Mark II is pretty good in low light. It's certainly a lot better in low light than its predecessor, but I say it's usable to about 2000. Over 2000, you're really going to start to see grain, where you're going to have to do some post-production grain reduction. Then moving over to the Ursa Mini, and it's a bit unfortunate that this guy, in this day and age where we have a lot of really sensitive sensors, gets really gross at about 1600 ISO. So it's not a low light camera. Now, for a lot of people who are doing studio and VFX work or traditional narrative, this is not an issue. This is what filmmaking was up until about 10 years ago, as we were shooting on film stock, which was rated traditionally to about 400 ISO. So if you're used to that, then this camera is amazing. It's going to do exactly what you expect it to do. However, if it's run and gun dock world where you're going into subjects with a lot of changing light, it's not going to be as strong as, say, the FS7 or the C300 Mark II. So really, the win for me in this particular case is the FS7 Mark II. Its low light capability is incredible. The quality of the image is really great for what you get. Number 4 is looks and log. This is where we start to separate things out in a very interesting way. These two cameras are designed with image processors in it that really facilitate a full production. So the Rec 709 image that comes out of these cameras is broadcast safe and it's ready to travel. With the Ursa Mini Pro, very different story. This camera is designed for post-production, and it's sort of like red cams in that particular way. When we're looking at the Cineon-like or the flat gamma curve profiles of log or their film profile with the Ursa Mini Pro, we have some interesting things happen there as well. Of course, the Ursa Mini Pro is going to dominate in terms of their post-production workflow. It's designed to integrate with DaVinci Resolve, and so grading their flat profile is really quite a pleasure. When we go to C-Log, it's very much the same sort of experience. I love the look of C-Log. I love grading C-Log. I've shot stuff with C-Log that is almost good to go with just the slightest little contrast curve adjustment. S-Log3, on the other hand, very different story. Now, S-Log3, I will say, is probably one of the most powerful log curves. That being said, it's a lot more difficult for the amateur colorist to manipulate and to grade in post. I've spent 3 or 4 times as long trying to grade S-Log footage as I have grading C-Log footage. So if it's going to a professional post house or a professional colorist, then it's not really an issue. Any one of these 3 are going to be great. But if you're doing a lot of your own coloring, you're going to find it takes a lot longer to massage out a really good image out of S-Log3. Number 5 is media. Now, how do these cameras record the media? The Ursa Mini Pro has a dual card slot, which is great. They can record either CFast cards or SD cards now, which is really exciting. But the challenge can be that even with the fastest cards available, you might still run into some drop frames. And there's been some people who have been testing and seeing where you're going to get drop frames and when you're not. So if you want the security of not risking drop frames, then you're going to want to still be using CFast. Again, there is going to be an adapter for using SSD media in the future, but for now, that's also going to cost you extra money. Going into the C300, you are still looking at CFast cards only, and then the Sony with the proprietary XQD cards. Now, when we're looking at price, SD cards are the cheapest, of course, at about the time we're recording this. For a 64 gig card, $130 approximately. The XQD is coming in at about $150, so only a few dollars more. But the CFast cards are still crazy expensive at $350 for a 64 gig card. So really, if we're looking at the quality of the data transfer rates and the price, the Sony really wins hands down. Okay, last but not least is number 6, which is studio and live production. You might not know this, but there's like this whole other industry out there called studio and live production. And while guys like Canon and Sony were out there servicing filmmakers, Blackmagic Design snuck in from behind and created a camera with an entire studio ecosystem built into it. And here's why that's a big deal. Because this camera can be controlled and communicate remotely with an ATEM switcher or master control panel. So you can control a lot of the elements of this camera, including coloring it with a Resolve type interface remotely. And in addition, you can do a couple other things. You can get the regular talkback through the SDI ports on this. In addition, you can buy a studio viewfinder that turns it completely into a studio camera. That's going to be an additional feature, but it really turns it into a studio camera. To be able to get that functionality with these cameras is an additional $10,000 to $20,000. And that's all built into this camera. And that's really where the value comes in with the Ursa Mini Pro, that the fact that you can do that is incredible. In summary, there's a ton more things that we could talk about, but we just don't have that kind of time. We'd be here for like an hour. But if I was to encourage you to look further afield, I'd say look at things like high frame rates. Each one of these cameras treats high frame rates quite a bit differently, as well as lens mounts. All of these cameras have different lens mount options, and depending on what lenses you have access to, that might influence your decision. But if I was to do broad strokes, I would say if you're doing studio live production or raw workflow, the Ursa Mini Pro is a winner hands down. These two cameras, even comparing price, can't do what the Ursa Mini can do. That being said, if you are doing indie filmmaking, doc work, that type of thing, then these two cameras are far better able to accomplish what you want for the price. I love what the FS7 can do, especially in low light, but I personally love the look of the C300. I love C-Log, as I mentioned, and I actually really like using this camera despite its ergonomic sort of deficiencies. That's about it. Thanks so much for watching. I really encourage you guys to subscribe to our channel and comment in the comment section below. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear what kind of videos you want us to do. And as always, find us on social media, Instagram, Facebook, and the Twitter. We're there. Thanks so much for watching. Stay tuned for more stuff like this.